What do you love? Good question. Could write a big list, couldn't we? John is frustratingly, I use that word advisedly, frustratingly black and white concerning what we should and shouldn't love. So that's not a very attractive slide, and the black doesn't show up real well, does it? But that's what it's meant to be. And we see that when, as in one of those verses that we read, he says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world." Okay, well that's a fair enough statement, but one that begins to concern us and maybe confuse us a little straight away. But John is black and white all the way through his writings. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Ooh. Surely there's some middle ground here. We can't have black and white here. Maybe there's some grey areas. Did you get that impression? Is that a grey slide? No, with John. Let's come to the next slide. It's either one or the other. It's either black or white. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Now, as with some other no grey areas, I call them, and we'll just whiz through these verse after verse, it just shows that John is constantly like this. There's no in between. And we can wrestle with these and we can argue with John maybe, and it's a good thing to do actually. But I hope that as when we come to the end of the statement, just one we'll look at today, not all of these, we'll probably see that John puts it in black and white because he's thought it through to the end. And he's boiled it down to this statement. So in chapter 1 verse 6, John says, if we claim to have fellowship with him and yet walk in the darkness, we lie. And we do not live out the truth. How would you feel about me standing up here, or John standing up here, or Graham, or Russell, anybody saying, you people are lying? That's what John was like. He's a bit in your face, isn't he, when you read it that way? So it's either black or white with John. You can't say you have fellowship with him if you're walking in the darkness. Chapter 2 verse 3, we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commandments. Whoever says I know him but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in him. It's not getting any more subtle, is it? Next one. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. Okay, we'll just keep moving through them. No one who lives in him keeps on sinning, and no one who continues to sin has either seen him or known him. Now, we're not going to do this morning. We could write a book about this, volumes of books, about debating with John how he can make these sort of no exception statements. If you continue to sin. And so we're not going to dwell on working them all out, just one. But it is important for us to understand that, and that's why it's underlined, continues to sin. We all stumble and fall and sin, and if you read all of 1 John, you find John allows for that. He said it'd be great if you didn't sin. I write to you so you won't, but you know when you do, if you confess it, we have the advocate. We have Jesus' blood to forgive us. That's a different sort of living, where you stumble and fall, and you might do it lots, and you feel like it's besetting and you're never going to overcome it, but you grieve about it and you come back and you say, God, forgive me. Continuing in sin, that expression, and what John is getting at is, there are people who for whom sinning is their way of life, and they don't feel any guilt about it. They don't think it's wrong. we're dealing with that in our world today. They're getting more and more clever at expressing that and saying, no, this is not wrong. But John says, well, if that's the sort of way, if you continue in sin that way, then you've never seen him or known him. He's so sure about, if you come to know the Father, you will always wrestle with sin. You will seek to overcome it through his grace and his power. It's important we get that one. The next one, we love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister, we've had this one before, is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God, whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must love their brother and sister. And lastly, I tried to get one from each chapter, but I got to. Could we go back one? Thanks. Yeah, we got a little out of step, but we're doing great. And this is a testimony. God has given us eternal life, and this life is in his Son. That's a lovely, positive, no exceptions statement, isn't it? Love that one. But whoever has the Son has life, and whoever does not have the Son of God does not have life. That's a sobering one, isn't it? Okay, so we'll move on to focus on the one no grey area statement that we want to look at today. And that's found in 1 John 2:15. We'll have the next slide, thanks. I've just gone to the New King James Version for it here as we begin to contemplate it, as we look at its directness and no exceptions sort of quality, and see if we can think through it and relate to it. Not debate with John, but say, well, yeah, you've thought it out. So again, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but it is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of the Father abides forever. The word is remains. Some translations put lives forever. Same sort of thing, but it's a permanence for those who are in the will of the Father. That's the one that I want to deal with. And if we go to the next slide, thanks, Aaron. And there it is again. I hope you don't get overcome with the repetition, but if it's emblazoned in your mind, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. I want to deal with two things in this, two statements that make up this verse. And one is the love of the world. We need to sort of sort out what John's talking about in the love of the world. And the love of the Father. And I'm going to deal with the love of the Father first. I think if we have the next slide, that'll make, yeah. That little expression there, the love of the Father. Some translations, most I've seen, have love of the Father. Some have interpreted it and put love from the Father. What's the difference, you say? You like just splitting hairs? No, there's a lot of difference. So I want to look at, does the love of the Father mean our love for the Father? And next slide. Or does it mean his love for us? Okay. Does it mean our love for him or his love for us? I do believe, and maybe I should just a word of testimony here, why I've become exercised about this and how it has helped me. And recently I was exercised, as I put it, and wrestling with the lack of awareness of God's love, the lack of being able to when things were getting rough, to be able to just rest in it, lay back, as it were, in the arms of God. And so, God, I don't have that experience all the time. And what's wrong with me? And I can look at, and I shared with the men and other people, I'm damaged goods like so many other people from my generation, whereas my father's love, it was there and he worked and provided, but I never once talked to my father about anything of any depth. And I don't recall that he ever said to me, I love you. So when you get that, you all know, when you get that background, that can make you sort of not able to sense, not able to rest in a love, to trust a love. So I was exercised about this, and I was reading this verse, don't love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the Father, and it hit me, I believe, that it's the love for us. The love of the Father is not in him. And God very clearly said to me, have a look at your love for the world. If you feel you're not reaching this sense of love that should be, that the whole word spells out for us, so that it should be there, then have a look at your love for the world. It's very straight. God is very straight about what he needs to tell us. And so that's when I come to say, oh yeah, this is really, the love of the Father's not in me, because the thing that hinders it is the love of the world. Now, just to back it up, as I said, some translations put for and some others, but just literally in the Greek it's of, the love of the Father. And even in context, as we look around, it's the love of the Father. And then there's a couple of verses, if we go on in the slides, that sort of, well, I've just said that one. The context in the Greek suggests it means God's love for us. If it's not there, then what's keeping it from being there? Not God and his grace and his desire. So, a couple of verses that sort of tell me that God's love precedes any love from us, whether it's for him or for others. It must precede, it must be right and in place before love can be. You know, we struggle so often, don't we? Say, I want to love God more. I believe God was telling me, you want to just get it right. You want to get in love with my love before you're trying to love others or me. So this is one of the verses that sort of back up, I believe, my stance on it. This is love. This is love. This is the definition. This is how you know what love really is. The word love has been bandied around and used and applied to every sort of thing, hasn't it? And we lose what it really means. This is love, John said. If you can't work it, this is it. Look at something. Not that we loved God, that doesn't come first, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. And the next verse, thanks, Aaron. And just another one, still all in 1 John. We love because he first loved us. And the next couple we can have up. So the love of the Father precedes our love for the Father. The Father's love for us precedes and provokes our love for him always. There's another verse somewhere that says we should provoke one another to love. Well, it's the love of the Father when it takes up residence in us, when we believe it and we trust it and we depend on it and we go forward trusting in it. It's that which provokes love for God. Just before we go on, I want to probably try and illustrate this a little more. My wife doesn't like me talking about her in messages, but she's had to live with it for many years. And you can't help it, you have to talk about what you know, don't you? Well, I find that my love for my wife grows, and it grows out of my remembering her love for me over the days and the years, and the care and the loyalty and the forgiveness and all those things. And that motivates me to want to love more. And you know, as we get older, and I'm looking around, we have some very young people here today, but as we get older, and it doesn't matter how old you are, gradually the physical and everything else loses its as much attraction. And what has to take its place? The love for the character. The love that you've seen there over the years. That I say, and I find most men who are honest say, don't know how she's put up with me. But in my damaged state, actually, that's what makes me want to love. Her love being there and in place. And that's how it is with God. I think we've got to start thinking first. It's not that it doesn't mean our love for God, but we think first. It's God's love, getting God's love set in us. So, well, before we go on to what do you love, there's a couple of other points there. I think I probably have enlarged enough on the effects of God's love, but there's a couple of ways. It comes up all the time. God's love in us is the cure for so many things. It's the way to power and peace and everything else. John says in chapter 4 of John 18, there is no fear in love. But perfect love casts out fear. You've learnt this verse, haven't you? And because fear has got torment in it. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. And perfect, that word there is full, the full blossom, the completeness. And so, and in context, John is talking about the fear that we may have when we have to face God. When everything's stripped away and we stand before God. And of course this whole letter, his whole gospel is about the love of God and what it does. And how. So he says, you know, when that love of God has taken hold of you, there's no fear of him, and I believe of anything else. Because if you believe the Father loves you, then even this rotten experience that you're having, this pain that you're going through, the dread of maybe, the love of the Father holds you, embraces you, and it casts out fear. I think it's an important thing to know and to have and to pray about and to work on. And if you like, strive for. To let the love of the Father dwell. Now Jesus sort of says the same thing, but in another way, over in Luke 11, 23 to 30, and no doubt in other Gospels too, and he tells his disciples, don't set your hearts. And this may begin to help us understand loving the world and the difference in loving that there can be. Don't set your hearts on what you'll wear or what you'll eat and so on. Don't do that. Don't worry about them. Why not? Because the Father will provide what you need. This is the Father's love for it. Jesus is saying the Father loves you. He will provide. You don't have to worry about him. If this wonderful, great God who can make a lily, who Jesus said Solomon's great robes and finery couldn't compare with the way that lily was dressed. And that lily was going to be thrown on the fire in a day or two. We had some lilies recently, they lasted a week, I think. But I think it's gone, the last one, is it? No, it's still there. But it'll be going, probably tomorrow or the next day. Don't worry. And you see, the other thing the love of God dwelling in you does for you is casts out worry. But you see, we're talking about loving the world. I'm just trying to draw the things here to get our differences going, understanding what love of the world is and love of God is. If you love the world, of course these things are of the world too, that Jesus is talking about, your food and your clothing and all that. If you're worried about them, you'll be worried and you'll be fearful. And John says, if you love the world, the love of the Father isn't in you. I think it ends up being very much logic while you're worrying and everything, because of whether you've got enough of the world, you're not resting in the love of the Father. That's how it is. We could just about wrap it up there, but we'll go on for a little bit. David tells me the battery in this will probably last for a little while. I said, will it last for an hour? And he looked at me. He said, oh, I don't know. I said, oh, well, if it keeps going, I'll keep going. So it's still going. So if the love of God in us is such a precious, important, powerful thing, what hinders us? John says it's the love of the world, and that's been up there again, our theme, what do you love? So now we're going to look at some things in the world that possibly you can love. Now you won't don't recognise anybody up there, that's a family. And I just asked, does it hinder God's love for us if we love family? Don't love anything in the world. We've got to define these things or we're in trouble. Okay, and the next one. Now there's somebody that I can say that's my nearest neighbour. You love your neighbour as yourself, your wife or your husband. If you enter into a marriage situation, he's your closest neighbour. And the hardest one to love. Not because there's anything wrong with them, as you've already heard from me, but because when you're at home, you're really who you are, and you struggle with that. Now, so loving your family, is it wrong to do that? Margie loves roses, as you can see, and she had a terribly sore foot in New Zealand, and we went one day to the Christchurch Gardens, and we were ferried around in a little tractor type thing all around the gardens. That was good, but she had to go back and see the roses the next day. She loves roses. They're part of her love of nature, and she walked with that sore foot. The rose garden was way at the back from the entrance, but she did. Does it hinder God's love for you to love roses? It's a thing of the world. It's in the world. Maybe roses aren't your thing. Maybe the next thing gets you going. The love of nature. Grand, majestic. Look past it to the God that's behind it. And as parents so often make loving little plans to do things for your kids, and God in creation, I'm thinking, he didn't just create things for fun. I'm sure he did have fun, but he created them for us to enjoy. And his thinking, his creation is driven by love and given through love. More nature, maybe you're not into the snow and that, but we'll look at the next slide. The blue isn't showing up so well there. Oh, it's not bad there, but if you love water and you love blue, Hokitika or Hokitika? Hokitika Gorge in New Zealand. Beautiful. It winds around amongst the rocks. So is it wrong to love nature? Then the next one. Maybe you're into activity. Maybe you're into excitement, the thrill of these things. This was way up in the mountains, overlooking the big lake near Queenstown. She whispered it to me. And we were high up in the mountain sort of level with these parasails and towing out, so Maybe that's your love. Adventure, sport and so on. And then, of course, there's one more that we should include, that and there's another reason why I love my wife. But you see, even there's a little illustration, isn't there? Margaret goes mad with herself. Gee, that's a good illustration. You hear a story or something happening around. But that's, if I just love my wife because she gives me pavlova like that, there's something gone wrong, isn't there? If I end up loving the pavlova, I'm not going through to the giver and loving them. So pavlova can be pleasure of eating, and we can think of all the physical pleasures and that God has given us. So do any of these things hinder our love for God? Next slide, thanks. But John does say, don't love the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Next step on the slide. Maybe as we've sort of made some comparisons through, you're not so confused or conflicted over a statement like don't love the world when we've looked at all these wonderful things in the world. But we don't need to be confused and conflicted about it if we come at it from the right angle. Next point, thanks. And it just goes on. We'll just go through these one after the other till the end of the slide. We've already asked that. Should we love our neighbour's wife? Should we love nature's beauty? Should we love physical pleasure? And the last point, yes, in their Father designed priority and purpose. We should love them. So, why does John say, if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him? We'll go to the next slide, and we think about the worldly love John is thinking of. He clearly defines it actually in context. And if we have the next part of that slide. Well, the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, and we're going to look at just a couple of translations of that and the next one, and you can just read over it quickly. It's what we've already been reading, and it's by way of repetition, and it's lust of the flesh, and in Greek that's sarx, S-A-R-X, and the NIV says sinful man. And some translations go with that, but it's the same word all the way in the New Testament. The flesh, Paul talks about the flesh all the time as being the problem. And the flesh is driven by the lust of the eyes. And then we have a boastful pride in what we have and what we do. And this is what John's thinking about when he's talking about the world. It's our use of the gifts and our attitude to them that concerns him. And if we can move to the next slide. There you go. Now my wife went crooked at me because she said God is spirit, but we're just illustrating, and that's what this is, the presence of God. And I'm using this one to help us understand, I hope, the process that John's looking at and talking about. In the garden, the gifts that God gave them were to show his love. And the gifts that he gave them was, first of all, his presence, to know his love. And he gave them each other, and he gave them the animals and the garden and the food and all those things. This is what they needed. I don't stand here condemning Eve and Adam, or whichever. I don't, because I've been there and done that. But if they had hung on to the love that was evident through what was given them from the Father, they may have avoided the crash. We'll go to the next slide, thanks. But we see that the cravings of the flesh, Satan said to Eve, that's a great fruit, if you eat that you'll be like God. The pride of the flesh, the wanting to use God's gifts to be independent of God with them. This is the sort of thing that happened in the garden. I don't think she realised, we could ask the question when we get there, did she realise that her love for the world would exclude the fruitful effects of the Father's love? Did she know that when she loved the world in this way, it would exclude the Father and let fear in? Because that was the first thing, wasn't it? You read the account, the first thing we read is they were afraid. They didn't stop breathing that day, but the love of God and the security of it and all of that died that day. Now there's another, and John wrote because he knows this well and truly. The love of the world in that way will exclude the Father. There's another example, and this is in the place called Laodicea, and in Revelation 3 and verse 17 we read there that when Jesus sent a message to this church, he sent, to 7 churches, a message, said something about what he thought about them and so on. What he found in this church was they were saying, we are rich, we have everything. And I just wonder that they were rich. Obviously, we can look at the history and find it was a very rich city. But they were rich, obviously, in clothing and all of that. And maybe they were rich too in how their meetings to worship God went. And maybe they had the best choir in Laodicea and all of that. They said, we're rich and we don't need a thing. But their sense, their use of God's gifts to them caused them to be, in God's terminology, naked, pitiful, poor, blind in God's sight. And the result of that was, and we have the next slide, Jesus was outside. The love of God. Jesus is God's ultimate expression of love. His gift to the church. He was outside the church in Laodicea. And it always will be that way. When the love of the world, when your dependence on the world, when you're seeing all your contentment is wrapped up in the world, God's love will be outside. And we move on to the next slide. That's back there in Laodicean times, old-fashioned, isn't it? This is a modern parable. Have a look at it. Same sort of thing, Jesus at a door. But if you look at it, I wonder how clearly you can see it all. Yeah. You look on the back row, there's a seat there with an elderly couple still in romance. I think that's the picture there. That's not Margaret and I again, as I said, but could be any couple here that are in love. That's a good thing. That's a thing in the world, isn't it? And then we've got this young mother. Can you see that she's holding up a baby? That's a great thing. The thing between a mother and child. Incredible stuff. And then we got a teenager. Oh, she's a teenager, isn't she? She's got a bike. Probably these days more likely she'd have a car with 8 cylinders and 300 horsepower. And also she got something else. What's that? She's in love with communication. Have you seen it? We've read about it. They meet in cafes or whatever, and they go at their text, and the people are sitting across from them. I'm a bit concerned. Our granddaughter now was excited to send us a message through the week off her tablet the first time she could, and I thought, oh, here we go. And the mother said she's been waiting to see when the reply came, and it's all good stuff, but it ends up hooking us. If we're not receiving messages from somebody, there must be something wrong with us. No, seriously, it becomes a psychological hook that we have. So there's a teenager, but they are good gifts. It's good to have a phone and to be able to communicate when you need to and that sort of thing. And then down in the front there's a young fellow glued to his skateboard. Can you see the skateboard? We've got kids in our street. We've been invaded by kids since January. There's some new people moved in and they play till after dark, and they run up and down the street, and they sit on my lawn because it's the greenest and thickest. And one girl said to me the other day when I was backing out the car, she said, "How do you get your lawn to be so thick and so green?" I said, "Well, you put a lot of water on it and a lot of fertiliser." But anyway, we've got kids everywhere, skateboards and whatever. And in a way, I feel that's good. When I was a kid, I could go and play on the street. We're in a close, but we are concerned. We're in a circuit, you know. We are concerned. And sometimes you hear people going round down that street, and these kids are all over the middle. But anyway, stop that, Bill. Let's get back to this. But they are good things. Good to get out there and play and everything else. And then well, come on. Just for those that haven't gone to sleep, what's the guy with the briefcase represent? He's a worker, business, getting on, organising life. And we're given those gifts and we should do them. And what's up on the hill behind them all? A mansion? Did I hear somebody say a mansion, the old word? They're homes. They're the rich homes. Nothing wrong with any of those things, all good things, but where is the love of God? On the other side of the door. So it's really just Laodicea brought up to date. And this is how it works. If our love for the gifts and the things that God has given, each of these life experiences pictured are part of the world which are gifts from God, but they will separate us from God's love if we set our hearts on them as the source of our satisfaction and contentment, independent of God and his love. The remedy for this is the remedy for trusting the passing away world, and that's what happens. We start to look to there. And sometimes it's easier to look for there than to seek the face of God, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and inquire in his temple. But the remedy for that, making that your satisfaction, is to remember God's love, and that his desire is to fill you with it, and so that you can trust it, for it to bring you power. And the remedy is to choose God's love and the search for it and the practice of it. We go to the next slide, and we find that John gives us, and we can move on to the next step straight away, 2 ways of living. One, loving the world. And John says that equals the loss of all you loved, because the world and its desires pass away. That's the fact of life. That's black and white. The next one, or allowing the love of the Father of God in you, which means remaining permanently in the Father's love. And John says, but those who do the will of God abide forever. Well, the will of God is the ultimate, the whole sum of all of God's will for you is that you know and live in his love. And there's the permanence there that nothing can touch. And that just leaves us 1 slide. No, 2. So John says, think it through. Think it through. Do not love the world or the things in the world. What do you love? If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. It's black and white, says John. There may be situation by situation in your life where the love of the world's got that corner and the love of the Father's not able to operate in that corner. Next slide, thanks. Here's our benediction from Paul. May the Lord direct your hearts into God's love and Christ's perseverance, for he will persevere with you, for he died so that you can receive this love. Amen.